She called 911 on my private estate. The deputy's first words changed everything. I was sitting quietly on my Montana ranch when sheriff lights suddenly appeared at my gate. The HOA president next door told police I was an intruder on a $6.2 million estate she claimed was not mine. But when the deputy stepped forward and said, "Good to see you again, Mr. Whitmore," everything changed. Stay with me to see how one deed, one lake, and one carefully built record revealed the truth. If you enjoy stories about land, justice, and standing your ground, subscribe and join us for more real-feeling HOA battles. At 5:36 that morning, the first thing I heard was not a phone ringing or a knock at the door. It was the sound of tires crushing the gravel road outside my gate. I had lived on Silver Creek Ranch long enough to know every sound that belonged there. The old wooden cattle gate had a certain creak when the wind pushed against it. The horses moved differently when elk crossed the upper ridge. The creek changed its rhythm after a cold night. But the flashing blue lights cutting through the pine trees did not belong. I stepped onto the porch of my ranch house and saw two sheriff's cruisers parked near the entrance road. Their headlights stretched across the pasture, illuminating the fence line, the old barn, and the sign that had marked my property for decades. Private property, Silver Creek Ranch. Then I saw her. Rebecca Caldwell stood beside my gate wearing a cream-colored jacket, holding her phone in one hand and a folder in the other. She looked completely calm. Too calm. She was not standing there like someone who had called for help. She was standing there like someone who believed the ending had already been written. When she saw me walking down from the porch, she pointed immediately. "That's him," she told the deputies. "That's the man I called about." I stopped several feet away. "Called about what, Rebecca?" She looked at me with the same expression she had used during every disagreement we had over the previous year. Not anger, not fear, certainty. "Daniel Whitmore," she said, "you need to step away from this property." I stared at her. "This is my property." She gave a small laugh, the kind people use when they think they are correcting someone who does not understand the situation. "No, Daniel, it isn't." One of the deputies looked between us. Rebecca opened the folder in her hand. "This estate has been vacant. The HOA has been dealing with ownership concerns for months. This man has been occupying a property that does not belong to him." I looked at the folder. Then I looked back at her. "You told them I don't own my own ranch." She ignored the question. "He has been refusing to cooperate. He has been trespassing, causing problems with the community, and now he is refusing to leave." The deputy closest to her shifted his stance. "Sir, can you identify yourself and confirm your connection to this property?" I reached slowly into my jacket pocket and pulled out my wallet. "I can do better than that." I handed him my identification and watched as he examined it. The younger deputy looked toward his partner. The older one had remained quiet since arriving. He stood near the cruiser, flashlight in hand, studying the ranch house, the gate, and me. Then he started walking forward. For a moment, Rebecca smiled. She thought the situation was moving exactly where she wanted. She thought the police arriving at my gate meant she had won. Then the deputy stopped. He looked at my face. The flashlight lowered. His entire posture changed. "Mr. Whitmore?" Rebecca's smile faded slightly. The deputy stepped closer. "Good to see you again, sir." The silence that followed felt heavier than the Montana morning air. Rebecca looked at him, then at me, then back at him. "You know him?" The deputy nodded. "Yes, ma'am." She seemed genuinely confused. "But he's trespassing." The deputy looked at her, then at the ranch behind me, then back at the documents in her hand. "No, ma'am, he's not." Her expression changed. Only for a second. But I saw it. The first crack. The first moment when she realized the story she had told was not surviving contact with reality. My name was Daniel Whitmore. For more than 3 decades, I worked on land disputes, illegal development cases, and property conflicts across the West. I spent my career protecting boundaries, reviewing claims, and separating facts from stories people wanted others to believe. After retirement, I bought Silver Creek Ranch because I wanted the opposite of conflict. 6,200 acres of Montana land, a spring-fed lake, old fences, a small family cabin, a place where the only arguments came from the wind moving through the pines or 2 elk fighting over territory on the ridge. I did not buy the ranch to fight anyone. I bought it because I was tired of watching people treat land like a number on a spreadsheet. But Rebecca Caldwell saw something different. She saw acreage, she saw lake access, she saw opportunity. And that morning, standing at my gate with sheriff's deputies beside her, she thought she was finally forcing me to give her what she wanted. She had no idea she had just made the biggest mistake of her entire plan. The younger deputy looked at the documents Rebecca had brought. "Ma'am, do you have proof that Mr. Whitmore does not own this property?" Rebecca lifted her folder. "I have HOA records." The deputy glanced at the papers. HOA records are not property ownership records. That sentence changed everything. Rebecca looked irritated. Not because she was wrong, because someone had finally said it out loud. The HOA did not own Silver Creek Ranch. The HOA did not own my lake. The HOA did not have authority over my gates, my fences, or my land. But Rebecca had spent months convincing herself that if she repeated something enough times, it became true. She stepped closer. "Well, this doesn't have to become complicated." I almost laughed. Complicated. 2 sheriff's cruisers were sitting at my gate because she had told them I was trespassing on my own property. Tut. "This became complicated when you called the police and lied about who I am." Her face tightened. The deputy immediately looked up. "Lied?" Rebecca hesitated, just for a moment. But hesitation tells you everything. She recovered quickly. "I was mistaken about some details." The deputy looked at his partner. Neither of them said anything. They did not need to. Everyone standing there understood the same thing. A mistake is forgetting a date. A mistake is misreading a document. A mistake is not looking at the person you have exchanged letters with, the person whose name appears on county records, and telling emergency services that he is an unknown trespasser. Rebecca had not made a mistake. She had created a story, and that story had just fallen apart in front of the people she expected to believe it. The deputies finished documenting the call. Before leaving, the older deputy turned toward me. "Mr. Whitmore, I'll make sure this report reflects exactly what happened." I nodded. "Thank you." Rebecca watched the cruisers turn around and drive back down the gravel road. For the first time that morning, she looked uncertain, but she still did not look defeated. That was something I learned over years of dealing with people who believed they were above consequences. They rarely stop after the first failure. They usually escalate. And as Rebecca Caldwell stood at my gate, watching the sheriff's vehicles disappear into the trees, I knew one thing. She had not called the police because she thought I was a stranger. She had called because she believed nobody would question her. She was wrong. The real question was not why Deputy Ethan Collins knew my name. The real question was, what would Rebecca do now that she knew the man she tried to remove was the one person she could not intimidate? The answer came faster than I expected. Rebecca Caldwell did not apologize. She did not call to explain. She did not admit that she had made a mistake. Instead, 3 days after the sheriff left my gate, a letter arrived. Not an email, not a phone call. A formal letter printed on thick paper with the Pine Ridge Estates logo at the top. The kind of paper people use when they want ordinary words to feel like official orders. I opened it at my kitchen table overlooking Silver Creek Lake. The first sentence told me everything I needed to know. "Dear adjacent property owner," not Daniel, not Mr. Whitmore, adjacent property owner. It was a small detail, but small details often reveal the thinking behind bigger actions. Rebecca did not see me as the owner of Silver Creek Ranch. She saw me as an obstacle sitting between her HOA and something she wanted. The letter referenced the previous incident with the sheriff's office and claimed there had been confusion regarding property boundaries and community interests. Confusion. That was the word she chose. Not false report. Not incorrect accusation. Confusion. Then came the request. Rebecca wanted a meeting, not to discuss what happened, to discuss a path forward. I already knew what that meant. People like Rebecca did not ask for meetings when they wanted to understand. They asked for meetings when they wanted another chance to control the outcome. But to understand how we reached that morning at my gate, you have to understand why Silver Creek Ranch mattered to me. I did not buy that land because I wanted to impress anyone. I had spent most of my career watching people make decisions about land without ever standing on it. Developers looking at maps, investors looking at numbers, companies looking at projected returns. They saw acreage, I saw consequences. After retiring from the Bureau of Land Management, I wanted a place where ownership still meant responsibility. Silver Creek Ranch was that place. The ranch had been private land for generations. The old wooden fences followed the same lines they had followed for decades. The spring-fed lake at the center of the property supplied wildlife, supported the ecosystem, and represented everything I believed land should be. Protected, respected, not just consumed. When I purchased the ranch, I spent months reviewing every document. The deed, the title history, the county records, the boundary surveys. I did that because my entire career taught me one lesson. Land disputes are rarely about dirt. They are about paperwork, who owns what, who has rights, who has authority, and who is pretending to have something they do not. That lesson became important the first time Rebecca Caldwell came to my property. It was almost a year before the police arrived at my gate. At the time, Pine Ridge Estates was still being developed. The first homes had been completed. Luxury houses with large windows facing the mountains, expensive landscaping, and carefully designed views. I remember seeing the construction crews from my porch. They were not a problem. Growth was not a problem. People building homes was not a problem. The problem started when Rebecca arrived in a white SUV and parked outside my gate. She stepped out wearing a tailored jacket and carrying a folder. The same kind of folder she carried the morning she called the sheriff. She smiled when I walked over. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, "I'm Rebecca Caldwell. I represent Pine Ridge Estates." "I know who you are." Her smile widened. "Then you know why I'm here." I looked at the folder. "No, I don't." She opened it and pulled out a set of maps. "Your lower valley is incredibly valuable." I looked past her toward the creek and the tree line. "It's ranch land." "Exactly." She said it like that was the reason it mattered. Beautiful ranch land. But with the right improvements, it could become something much bigger. There it was. Not hidden, not subtle. Opportunity. Her word. My concern. "What kind of improvements?" Rebecca pointed toward the southern section of my property. "The lake area." I said nothing. She continued. "Pine Ridge is expanding. Our residents are looking for additional recreational opportunities. Trails, water access, outdoor amenities." I looked at her. "You're talking about my lake," she smiled. "I'm talking about cooperation." That word again. Cooperation. People often use that word when they want something from you and want you to feel unreasonable for refusing. "What exactly are you asking for?" Rebecca folded her hands. "An agreement." "What kind of agreement?" "A shared access arrangement." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because I knew exactly what she was doing. She was trying to make ownership sound like partnership. "My lake is not a community amenity." Her expression changed slightly. Only slightly. But I noticed. People who are used to getting their way rarely react well to the word no. "Mr. Whitmore, I think you may not understand the opportunity here." "No, Rebecca. I understand it perfectly." She stared at me. I'm not interested. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the creek moving beyond the trees. Then she closed the folder. I hope you reconsider. I won't. She nodded. But the smile was gone. Before she reached her vehicle, she stopped. Sometimes isolated properties struggle when they're surrounded by a growing community. I looked at her. Is that a warning? She smiled again. No, just reality. Then she drove away. At the time, I thought she was frustrated. I did not realize she had already started looking for another way in. A month later, Pine Ridge Estates held a community meeting. I was not invited, but I heard about it from one of my neighbors, a retired rancher named Tom Ellis, who lived several miles away. He told me Rebecca had shown residents a presentation about future expansion opportunities. One slide caught his attention. A picture of Silver Creek Lake. My lake. The caption underneath read, Potential Future Community Recreation Area. Tom called me that night. Daniel, you know they're showing your property in their presentation? I remember sitting there in the dark, looking out toward the water. They can show a picture. Maybe, Tom paused, but they're talking like they have a right to it. That was the moment I stopped thinking of Rebecca as an ambitious HOA president. Ambition is not dangerous by itself, but ambition combined with entitlement becomes something else. After that, I started paying attention. I watched Pine Ridge meetings. I reviewed public records. I followed the language they used. And everywhere I looked, I saw the same pattern. They were slowly changing the story. My private lake became community access. My ranch boundary became shared land concerns. My refusal became failure to cooperate. The facts stayed the same, only the words changed. Then came the sheriff's visit. And after that failed, Rebecca finally understood something. She could not scare me away. So she needed another strategy. The letter on my kitchen table was only the beginning. Because 3 weeks after the police incident, another envelope arrived. This one was heavier. Inside was a document titled Voluntary Annexation and Community Integration Proposal. I read it once. Then I read it again. Rebecca was not asking for access anymore. She was asking me to give up control. The proposal required Silver Creek Ranch to become subject to Pine Ridge Estates rules. It included HOA oversight, annual assessments, architectural restrictions, and buried on the last page was the part that mattered most: a permanent access corridor across my land to Silver Creek Lake. I placed the document beside my original deed, 2 pieces of paper, one proving what I owned, one trying to change it. That was when I understood Rebecca Caldwell's real plan. She did not want permission. She wanted paperwork that looked like permission, and she was willing to create that illusion until enough people believed it. The sheriff's visit had answered one question. She could not remove me. But now I had a new question. How far would she go to make people believe she owned something that was never hers? I got the answer one envelope at a time. The first letter arrived on a Monday morning. Pine Ridge Estates HOA letterhead, Rebecca Caldwell's signature at the bottom. The language was polite, professional, and carefully chosen. That was what made it dangerous. People rarely announce when they are trying to take something from you. They usually start by making it sound reasonable. The letter informed me that Silver Creek Ranch had several exterior compliance concerns that impacted the surrounding community. I read the first violation: unmaintained vegetation. I looked out the window toward the southern pasture. The vegetation they were referring to was a line of old-growth pine trees that had stood there longer than Pine Ridge Estates had existed. The second violation was related to inconsistent rural structures. That meant my barn, the same barn that had been repaired, maintained, and used for decades. The third involved boundary appearance concerns. That meant my wooden cattle fence, a fence that existed before Rebecca Caldwell ever knew my name. At the bottom of the letter was a deadline: 30 days. Correct the issues or face additional action. I placed the letter on my desk beside the annexation proposal. 2 documents, 2 different strategies. One tried to make me join them. The other tried to make me afraid of refusing. I called Rachel Morgan the next morning. I had known Rachel by reputation before I ever needed her. She specialized in property disputes, easements, and land conflicts, where one side believed paperwork could replace ownership. When she arrived at the ranch, she spent less time looking at the property and more time looking at the documents. That told me everything I needed to know about her. Good attorneys do not get distracted by the scenery. They look for the weakness. She read the HOA letter twice. Then she looked at me. "Daniel, do you have any agreement with Pine Ridge Estates?" "No." "Any HOA membership?" "No." "Any recorded covenant attached to your deed?" "No." Rachel placed the letter down. "Then this is not enforcement." "What is it?" She looked at the HOA logo in the corner. "Pressure." That word stayed with me, because pressure was exactly what it felt like. Rebecca was not trying to win an argument. She was trying to create exhaustion. She wanted me spending time answering letters, responding to complaints, defending things I had already legally owned. She wanted me reacting, and people who are constantly reacting are easier to control. Rachel asked me for my property records. I brought out everything: the deed, the title insurance documents, the county filings, the original surveys. She spent several hours reviewing them at my kitchen table while the lake sat quiet beyond the windows. Finally, she leaned back. I was expecting something complicated. And it's not. That surprised me. Rachel tapped the deed. "This is one of the cleanest property histories I've seen." She pointed to the legal description. "Silver Creek Ranch predates Pine Ridge Estates by decades. There is no recorded connection between your land and their association." "So they have no authority?" "Not over your property." She paused. "But that does not mean they cannot create problems." That was the part people misunderstand about land disputes. Being right and proving you are right are not always the same thing. The truth does not automatically protect itself. You have to preserve it, document it, defend it. And Rebecca Caldwell understood something important. Most people do not fight because they are wrong. They stop fighting because they are tired. A week later, the second letter arrived. This one was more aggressive. It accused my horses of creating an environmental concern. 2 horses, on 6,200 acres. The letter referenced community health standards and shared environmental responsibility. Rachel and shook her head. She is trying to create a record. For what? For the argument she wants to make later. She slid the letter back toward me. If she sends enough complaints, she can tell people there is an ongoing issue, even if every complaint is dismissed. That was exactly what happened next. Over the following months, complaints started appearing. A report about runoff from the ranch, an allegation about livestock conditions, a concern about the old barn. Every complaint triggered a response. Every response produced the same result. Nothing was wrong. County officials inspected the property. They reviewed the water flow. They examined the barn. They checked the livestock area. Every report came back clean. One inspector told me something I never forgot. "Mr. Whitmore, I've seen properties with 10 times the problems you're being accused of." He looked toward the lake. "This place is being maintained better than most private land in this county." I thanked him. Then I filed the report away. That was when I started building my own file. Not because I wanted a fight, because I knew where this was going. Every letter, every complaint, every visit, every document, everything went into a folder. Then another. Rebecca noticed. People like her always notice when their pressure stops working. The next time I saw her was at the entrance to Pine Ridge Estates. She was standing near the decorative stone sign with several homeowners around her. When she saw me, she smiled. "Daniel." I stopped. "Rebecca." She looked at the folder in my hand. "Still keeping records?" "I keep records of anything involving my property." She smiled. That sounds exhausting. No, I looked at her. What's exhausting is dealing with things that should not exist. A few homeowners looked uncomfortable. Rebecca noticed. Her expression hardened. You need to understand something. Pine Ridge is a community. I understand. No, I don't think you do. People invested here because of this area. They expected certain standards. I looked toward the houses behind her. I am not part of your community. She stepped closer. You are surrounded by it. That sentence told me everything. Rebecca did not understand boundaries. Not property boundaries. Not personal boundaries. Not legal boundaries. In her mind, being nearby meant having influence. And influence meant control. That afternoon, Rachel called me after reviewing another set of public records. Daniel, I found something. What? The HOA filed a declaration amendment last year. I sat up. Related to my property? Not directly. Then why does it matter? Because they referenced your ranch. I looked out toward the lake. How? They described the area around Silver Creek Lake as a future community access zone. I was quiet. Can they do that? No. Her answer came immediately. But the important question is why they did. That question changed the entire situation. Rebecca was not simply sending violation letters. She was creating a paper trail, a story, a version of reality where Pine Ridge Estates had some kind of claim to my land. And if enough people saw the same false story repeated enough times, they might stop asking whether it was true. They might start asking when I would give in. A few days later, Rebecca sent another letter. This one was different. No violations, no complaints, no warnings. Just one sentence at the top. Final opportunity to resolve community access concerns voluntarily. Attached was a new document, a formal agreement, a proposed solution. That was when I knew the letters were never the real attack. They were only the preparation. Rebecca had spent months trying to make me look like a problem. Now she was ready to make herself look like the solution. And when I opened that document and saw the words written across the first page, I realized exactly what she was trying to do. She was not trying to control my ranch. She was trying to rewrite who owned it. I knew that the moment I opened the document sitting on my kitchen table. The title looked harmless. Community Access Agreement. Those 3 words were carefully chosen. Not purchase agreement. Not transfer agreement. Not easement request. Community access. It sounded friendly. It sounded temporary. It sounded like something neighbors might sign over coffee. But after decades reviewing land disputes, I knew better. The most dangerous documents are often the ones written to sound reasonable. I read the first page, then the second, then the third. By the time I reached the final page, I understood exactly what Rebecca Caldwell was attempting. She was not asking for access to Silver Creek Lake. She was creating a claim that access already existed. The agreement stated that Pine Ridge Estates would receive shared recreational privileges along the eastern section of my property. That section included the shoreline of Silver Creek Lake, my lake, the same lake Rebecca had tried to describe as a future community feature, the same lake she had shown investors in development meetings, the same lake that had never belonged to anyone except the owners of Silver Creek Ranch. I placed the document beside my original deed. The difference was obvious. My deed contained county recording numbers, legal descriptions, survey references, and a documented chain of ownership. Rebecca's agreement contained promises, and promises do not create property rights. Rachel Morgan arrived that afternoon. I handed her the document without saying anything. She read it standing beside the kitchen counter. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Finally, she looked up. Where did you get this? Rebecca sent it. Rachel looked back at the first page. She sent this directly to you? Yes. She slowly closed the folder. That was a mistake. Why? Because now we know exactly what she is trying to do. Rachel sat down and began marking sections with a pen. The more she read, the more serious her expression became. She references a 1994 boundary review. Does that exist? That's what we need to find out. She continued reading. She also references historical recreational access rights. I looked at her. Do I have any? Rachel shook her head. Not for Pine Ridge Estates. That answer was clear, but I could tell there was something else bothering her. What? She pointed at a paragraph near the bottom. This language. What about it? It is written like someone is trying to make a future legal argument. I looked closer. The wording was careful. Very careful. It did not say Pine Ridge Estates owned the lake. It did not say they had purchased anything. Instead, it suggested that because the community had existed nearby for several years, residents had developed an implied interest in accessing the land. An implied interest, a phrase designed to sound like law, but without actual ownership behind it. Rachel leaned back. Daniel, this is not a mistake. I know. No, I mean this was drafted by someone who knew enough about property law to make it confusing. That mattered. Rebecca was not simply making random claims. Someone had helped her build them. The next morning, Rachel contacted Michael Turner. Michael had spent more than 30 years working as a county surveyor before retiring. He knew the land around Bitterroot Valley better than almost anyone. 3 days later, he arrived at Silver Creek Ranch carrying a weathered leather folder. Inside were copies of old county maps. He spread them across my dining table. Daniel, I remember this area. He pointed toward the eastern boundary. Before Pine Ridge existed, this was agricultural land. He moved his finger along the map. This line here is the original ranch boundary. Then he opened another document. Here is the 1994 survey they referenced. I looked at the paper. Is this the one Rebecca used? Michael nodded. Probably. I studied the map. Something immediately felt wrong. Michael noticed. You see it? The line, he nodded. The eastern boundary marker was never moved. Then why does her document suggest otherwise? Michael pulled out another copy. Because this version is not the original county filing. The room went quiet. Rachel leaned forward. What is it? Michael turned the paper around. A private copy. Meaning? Meaning someone reproduced the survey information but changed how the boundary was represented. I looked at the altered line. It was subtle, only a few inches on the page. But in the real world, that line moved hundreds of acres of land. It moved the lake. It moved the access path. It moved the story Rebecca wanted people to believe. Michael tapped the document. This is why boundary disputes are dangerous. Most people look at a map and trust what they see. He looked at me. But a map is only as honest as the person who created it. That was the first moment I realized the scale of what we were facing. Rebecca was not just sending letters. She was building a false history, a history where Pine Ridge Estates had always been connected to Silver Creek Ranch. Rachel gathered the documents. We need to find out who prepared this. I already know who I want to ask. Who? The person selling the dream. That afternoon, I drove to the Pine Ridge Estates office. I did not go there angry. Anger gives people like Rebecca exactly what they want. They want emotion because emotion makes you easier to dismiss. I went there with copies of the documents. Facts. Rebecca was sitting behind a glass desk when I entered. She looked surprised. Not afraid. Surprised. Daniel. I placed the folder on her desk. We need to discuss this. She looked at the folder. I thought we were already discussing cooperation. No. I looked directly at her. You're trying to create ownership where none exists. Her expression changed. Only slightly. But enough. I think you misunderstand the purpose of the agreement. No, I understand it perfectly. She leaned back. You are making this more complicated than it needs to be. That is exactly what people say when the simple truth does not help them. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Rebecca smiled. You know, Daniel, there are many ways communities work together. Yes. And sometimes isolated property owners have trouble seeing the bigger picture. I looked around her office. On the wall were photographs of Pine Ridge Estates, beautiful houses, mountain views, families walking near landscaped trails. Then I saw something else. A large development board. Future Expansion Plan, Phase 2. My eyes stopped on the map. There it was. Silver Creek Lake, not labeled as private property, not labeled as restricted land, just shown as part of a future recreational area. I looked back at Rebecca. When were you planning to tell your investors you didn't own this? Her smile disappeared. For the first time, I saw something behind the confidence. Concern. Just for a second. Then it was gone. You should leave. I picked up the folder. I agree. As I walked out, I knew something had changed. Before that meeting, Rebecca believed she was negotiating. Now she knew I understood the plan. And people who believe they are close to getting something usually become more aggressive when they realize they might lose it. That evening, Rachel called. She had found another document, a development proposal connected to Pine Ridge Estates. It mentioned luxury cabins, a private marina, expanded lake access, and potential investors. Daniel, Rachel said, this is bigger than the HOA. How much bigger? A pause. Then she answered. Big enough that Rebecca may have promised people something she never owned. I looked out toward Silver Creek Lake. The water was still, quiet, unaware that people had been putting a price tag on it. Rebecca Caldwell had spent months trying to convince everyone that my land belonged to her community. Now we knew why. She was not fighting for access. She was selling it. And the question was no longer whether Rebecca had crossed a line. The question was, how many people had already paid her for something that was never hers to sell? I got the answer 3 days later, and when I saw the documents, I realized Silver Creek Lake was never the end goal. It was the beginning. Rachel Morgan called me just after sunrise. Daniel, I need you to come into town. Her voice was different. Not worried, focused. That was how Rachel sounded when she had found something important. What did you find? Bring your copy of the deed, and bring everything Rebecca sent you. I knew immediately this was no longer about a disagreement with an HOA. This was becoming a case. When I arrived at Rachel's office, she already had documents spread across her desk. Maps, emails, development proposals, meeting notes, the same type of paperwork that most people ignore until it is too late. Rachel pointed to a set of blueprints. This came from a public planning submission. I looked at the title, Pine Ridge Estates Phase 2 Expansion. The first page showed luxury cabins along the western side of the development. The second page showed a private trail system. The third page showed a waterfront recreation area, Silver Creek Lake. I looked at Rachel. They included my lake. She nodded. Not just included it, they marketed it. She handed me another document. It was a promotional package prepared for potential investors. The language was carefully written. Exclusive mountain recreation access, private wilderness experience, future lake amenities, all phrases designed to create excitement. None of them mentioned one important fact. They did not own the lake. I read the pages slowly. The same lake I had protected, the same shoreline where elk came down to drink, the same water I had watched freeze and thaw through Montana winters. To Rebecca, it was not a place. It was a feature, a selling point, a number on a development spreadsheet. Rachel watched me carefully. This is where it changes. How? Before this, Rebecca was trying to pressure you. She tapped the documents. Now we can show she had a financial reason to do it. That mattered, because intent changes everything. A person making a mistake tries to correct it. A person building a profit plan around a mistake tries to hide it. The next person we needed to speak with was Linda Parker. Linda was the treasurer of Pine Ridge Estates. For months, she had approved budgets, signed reports, and watched Rebecca control every major decision inside the HOA. She agreed to meet us away from the community office. When she arrived, she looked exhausted. She carried a small envelope in her hand. I should have come sooner. Rachel sat across from her. Why didn't you? Linda looked down. Because I thought Rebecca knew what she was doing. She placed the envelope on the table. I thought she was negotiating with Daniel. I opened it. Inside were copies of HOA financial records, special assessments, lake improvement fees, community access planning expenses. I looked at the numbers. $300 per household? Linda nodded. Collected for 2 years. For what? She hesitated. That's the problem. Rachel looked through the documents. There is no recorded lake improvement project. No. No construction permits? No. No land agreement. Linda shook her head. Nothing. The room went quiet. Rebecca had not simply told people the HOA would have access to Silver Creek Lake. She had collected money based on that belief. Linda continued. She always said the lake access would increase property values. Rachel looked up. Did she ever tell homeowners the land belonged to Daniel? Linda's expression answered before her words did. No. That was the moment the situation became clear. Rebecca was not just creating confusion. She was creating an expectation. She wanted hundreds of homeowners to believe something was already theirs. Because once enough people believed it, Daniel would not just be fighting Rebecca. He would be fighting the pressure of an entire community. That was how these schemes worked. They did not rely on one lie. They relied on many people repeating the same lie. Rachel spent the next several hours reviewing every document Linda brought. Then she found something. A payment record, a consulting invoice, paid directly to a company connected to Rebecca. Rachel read it twice. Daniel, I looked over. What? This is important. The company name was listed as a community planning consultant. The payments were described as development coordination services, but the dates matched meetings where Rebecca presented the lake expansion plans. Linda leaned forward. I knew something felt wrong. How much? Rachel calculated quickly. Over $80,000. Linda closed her eyes. I signed some of those checks. Her voice dropped. I thought it was legitimate. I looked at her. You were given false information too. That was something I had learned over the years. Not everyone involved in a bad situation is the person creating it. Some people are simply standing close enough when the truth finally arrives. But Rebecca was not finished. That became clear when Rachel found the investor communications, emails between Rebecca and outside developers. One message stood out. We need lake access confirmed before final investor commitment. Another said, owner resistance is the remaining obstacle. Owner resistance. That was how Rebecca described me. Not a person, not a neighbor, an obstacle. Rachel leaned back. Daniel, she is not trying to convince you. No. She is trying to create enough momentum that your refusal becomes the only thing standing in the way. I looked at the email again. That was exactly the strategy. Make me appear unreasonable. Make the community believe I was blocking progress. Make investors believe the land issue would eventually disappear. And then pressure me until I gave up. But Rebecca made one mistake. She thought I was protecting only my own interest. She did not understand what land meant to me. Ownership was not just having a deed. It was respecting what came before you. The people who built the fences, the people who cared for the water, the people who understood that some places are valuable because they cannot be replaced. When I returned to Silver Creek Ranch that evening, I stopped at the lake. I looked across the water and thought about how close Rebecca had come to turning it into something it was never meant to be. A private amenity, a marketing tool, a product. The next morning, Rachel filed the first formal notice, a legal preservation demand. It required Rebecca, the HOA, and any connected developers to preserve all documents related to Silver Creek Ranch, the lake access claims, and the proposed expansion. No more altered stories, no more missing records, no more pretending. Everything would have to be preserved. Everything could be examined. I thought that would slow her down. I was wrong. That afternoon, Rebecca held a Pine Ridge Estates community meeting, and according to Linda, she stood in front of her homeowners and told them I was trying to stop their future. She told them I was refusing cooperation. She told them she was protecting their investment. Then she announced the next step, a boundary verification project, a new survey, a new attempt to prove Pine Ridge had rights to land it never owned. When Linda told me that, I looked toward the old wooden fence line running along the eastern edge of my ranch. I finally understood. Rebecca had tried letters, she had tried pressure, she had tried paperwork. Now she was going after the physical boundary itself. And if she succeeded, even temporarily, she could create the appearance that her claims were real. The lake was never just about access. It was about control. And Rebecca Caldwell was about to make her most dangerous move yet. The survey crew arrived on a Thursday morning. I saw them before they reached my main gate. A white pickup truck came down the gravel road from Pine Ridge Estates, followed by another vehicle carrying equipment. No warning, no appointment, no conversation. Just people showing up with tools and paperwork, expecting the land to accept whatever they were trying to put on it. I walked toward the eastern fence line where the vehicles stopped. A man in an orange safety vest stepped out carrying a clipboard. "Daniel Whitmore?" "Yes." He looked down at his papers. "We're here for the Pine Ridge Estates Boundary Verification Project." I looked at the equipment in the truck. "Boundary verification of what?" He hesitated. "The property line between Pine Ridge and the adjacent parcel." "Which adjacent parcel?" He already knew the answer. Silver Creek Ranch. I looked at the survey documents he was holding. "Who authorized this?" He handed me the paperwork. The first page had Pine Ridge Estates letterhead. The signature at the bottom belonged to Rebecca Caldwell. I read it carefully. The wording was almost identical to the earlier documents. Community boundary review, shared access evaluation, future planning consideration. Words designed to sound harmless. But behind those words was the same idea. They wanted to make it appear that my property was still open for discussion. I handed the papers back. "You need to leave." The survey worker looked uncomfortable. "I'm just following the work order." "I understand." I pointed toward the ranch boundary. "But this is private property, and no one has permission to conduct a survey here." The man looked toward his truck. "I'll contact the office." "You should." The crew left 20 minutes later. They did not argue. They did not threaten. But the message was clear. Rebecca was testing the boundary, not the property line, the actual boundary of what she could get away with. That afternoon, Rachel came to the ranch. I showed her the survey documents. She read them quietly. Then she looked at me. "This is exactly what we expected. She is trying to create evidence." "Yes." Rachel placed the paperwork on the table. "If she can get a survey recorded before anyone challenges it, she can use it to confuse people. Even if it is wrong. Especially if it is wrong." She explained something important. Property disputes are rarely won by whoever tells the best story. They are won by whoever has the strongest evidence. A false document can create months of confusion. A real document can end an argument. But only if someone preserves it. That was when Rachel helped me organize everything. The original deed, the county records, the historic maps, the HOA letters, the false agreement, the investor documents, the financial records Linda provided. Every piece went into a timeline, every action, every date, every person involved. Rebecca had spent months creating a trail. She just did not realize the trail worked both ways. The more she moved, the more evidence she created. A week later, I installed cameras along the eastern boundary. Not because I expected trouble, because I expected another move. The cameras covered the fence line, the access road, and the area around the lake. Everything was documented. Every vehicle, every person, every visit. The same way I had documented cases during my career. Facts first, emotion second. That was something Rebecca never understood. She thought silence meant weakness. It did not. Silence gave me time. While I was building my file, Rebecca was building her public story. She created the neighborhood campaign called Protect Pine Ridge Future. The message was simple. Daniel Whitmore was blocking progress. He was refusing cooperation. He was preventing improvements that would benefit everyone. She never mentioned that the improvements required access to my land. She never mentioned that the lake was privately owned. She never mentioned the missing legal authority behind her claims. She only repeated the version that helped her. And repetition is powerful. That is why facts need records, because rumors travel faster than corrections. Linda Parker called me one evening. Her voice was quiet. She's getting nervous. Why? Because investors are asking questions. I looked out toward the lake. What questions? They want proof that the access rights are real. That was the weakness. Rebecca could convince homeowners. She could pressure neighbors. But investors did not care about confidence. They cared about documents, ownership, risk. Linda continued. She told the board not to discuss the lake agreements outside meetings. Why? Because she said the situation was sensitive. That was the moment I knew Rebecca understood something had changed. She was no longer dealing with someone who would simply ignore her. She was dealing with someone who was preserving every move. The following week, Rachel received a response from Rebecca's attorney. The letter claimed Pine Ridge Estates had historical community interests connected to Silver Creek Ranch. Rachel read it twice. Then she laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was weak. Historical community interests? What does that mean? Nothing. She handed it back. It is a phrase designed to sound like a legal right without actually being one. That was Rebecca's entire strategy. Replace ownership with language. Replace facts with impressions. Replace records with assumptions. But assumptions collapse when they reach a courtroom. A few days later, Michael Turner returned with the final survey review. He brought the original county maps, the ones that had been archived decades before Pine Ridge Estates existed. He placed them beside Rebecca's documents. The difference was undeniable. The original records showed Silver Creek Ranch boundary, private lake ownership, no HOA access rights, no shared recreational area, no easement, nothing. Michael tapped the old map. This is the truth. Then he tapped Rebecca's version. This is a story someone created. Rachel photographed every page. We now have the evidence showing the exact moment the claim changed. That was the turning point. Before, we knew Rebecca was wrong. Now we could prove how she became wrong. And that difference mattered. Because legal battles are not about proving someone feels unfair. They are about proving someone crossed a line. Rebecca had crossed several. The only question was whether she would stop. She did not. On a Friday afternoon, I received a new notice from Pine Ridge Estates. This time it was not a letter. It was a formal demand. The HOA claimed that Silver Creek Ranch was interfering with planned community improvements. They demanded access discussions within 10 days. At the bottom was a warning. Failure to cooperate could result in further legal action. I read it once. Then I placed it beside my deed. Rachel looked at both documents. She thinks she's forcing you into negotiation. She is. Why? Because once I negotiate, she can claim there was a dispute over ownership. Rachel nodded. Exactly. The trap was clear. Rebecca did not need to win immediately. She only needed to create the appearance that ownership was uncertain. That was how she operated. Slowly, quietly, through paperwork. But she made one mistake. She underestimated how long I was willing to wait. I spent my career watching people reveal themselves when they thought they had already won. Rebecca was doing the same thing. Every letter, every survey, every public statement, every demand. She was building the case against herself. And I was simply making sure nobody could erase it. Because the next move would not be mine. It would be hers. And when Rebecca finally made the mistake we had been waiting for, she would not be fighting an argument. She would be fighting a record. For months, Rebecca Caldwell had built her entire strategy around one belief: that if she controlled the story, she controlled the outcome. She believed the homeowners would believe her. She believed the investors would trust her. She believed the county would eventually become tired of dealing with complaints and simply accept the version of events she repeated the most. But there was one thing she never accounted for. Evidence does not get tired. Evidence does not get intimidated. And evidence does not change because someone speaks louder. By early summer, the file Rachel Morgan had built had grown into something much larger than I expected. Every letter Rebecca sent, every complaint filed against the ranch, every document referencing Silver Creek Lake, every map showing the false boundary, every financial record Linda Parker provided. Everything was organized. Everything had dates. Everything had sources. Rebecca had spent months creating a trail. She just did not realize I had been following it. Then came the call from Linda. Daniel, something happened at the HOA meeting. I was sitting at my desk, reviewing the latest documents from Rachel. What happened? Rebecca knows the investors are getting nervous. Why? Because they asked for proof of lake access. I already knew the answer. She did not have proof. She had assumptions. Linda lowered her voice. She told everyone the legal issues would be resolved soon. Did she mention my name? A pause. Yes. What did she say? Linda hesitated. She said you were being difficult. I looked down at the documents in front of me. That was the word Rebecca always used. Difficult. Not wrong. Not illegal. Difficult. Because if she could make me appear unreasonable, she could avoid explaining why her plans depended on land she did not own. She's preparing people, Rachel told me later that day. For what? For escalation. Rachel had been right about everything so far. Rebecca did not back down when pressure failed. She increased pressure. And this time, she chose the most powerful tool she had: public perception. The next morning, Pine Ridge Estates residents received an email from Rebecca. The subject line was, "Community Safety Concern Regarding Silver Creek Ranch." That title alone told me what she was trying to do: turn a property dispute into a safety issue. The email claimed there had been unusual activity near the HOA boundary. It mentioned concerns about access, security, and community protection. It never accused me directly. That would have been too obvious. Instead, it created suspicion, a suggestion, a feeling, the same method she had used from the beginning: create uncertainty, then offer herself as the solution. Rachel read the email. She is getting desperate. Because the investors want proof? Because the facts are catching up. I thought that would be the end of it. It was not. 3 nights later, Rebecca made the move we had been waiting for. At 6:47 p.m., I was sitting on the porch overlooking Silver Creek Lake. It was the same place where I had spent countless quiet evenings since buying the ranch. The same place where I reviewed documents, drank coffee, and listened to the property settle into the evening. Then I heard the sound. Gravel, vehicles, fast movement near the front gate. I stood up. 2 sheriff's vehicles came through the entrance road. Their lights reflected off the old wooden fence posts. For a second, I thought there had been an accident. Then I saw Rebecca's SUV behind them, and I understood. She had done it again. She stepped out before the deputies reached the porch. Daniel! Her voice carried across the yard. You need to come outside. I stayed where I was. Why are the deputies here, Rebecca? One of the deputies looked uncomfortable. The other checked his notes. Sir, we received a report of a trespassing situation. I looked at Rebecca. A trespassing situation? She crossed her arms. This property is under dispute. No, I looked at the deputy. This property is not under dispute. Rebecca stepped forward. He has no right to be here. The deputy looked between us. Ma'am, do you have documentation showing that? Rebecca immediately produced a folder. The same kind of folder she always carried. The HOA has been managing this area. The deputy opened it. He looked through the pages. Then he looked back at Rebecca. Do you have a deed? She stopped, only for a moment. But it was enough. No, the matter is complicated. The deputy closed the folder. Property ownership usually is determined by recorded documents. I almost smiled. The same truth I had been saying for months. Now she was hearing it from someone else. But Rebecca was not finished. She changed direction. I am concerned about his behavior. The deputy looked at her. What behavior? He refuses to cooperate. He has been hostile toward the community. That was when I understood. This was not about removing me from the property. Not yet. It was about creating another record, another complaint, another moment where she could claim I was the problem. Then she made the mistake. She said something that changed everything. I already told dispatch he was not supposed to be here. The deputy looked up. You spoke with dispatch? Yes. When? Earlier. The second deputy pulled out his notebook. What exactly did you tell them? Rebecca hesitated. The silence lasted only a few seconds, but it was enough. The deputy looked at me. Mr. Whitmore, can you confirm you own this property? I walked back inside and returned with my deed. The document that had started all of this, the same document Rachel had reviewed, the same document Rebecca had ignored. The deputy read it carefully. Then he handed it to his partner. After a few seconds, the partner looked up. Sir, this property is registered to you. Yes. The deputy turned toward Rebecca. Ma'am, did you know Mr. Whitmore was the owner? Her expression changed. A small crack. Then she recovered. I believed there were ownership concerns. That's not what I asked. The question hung in the air. Did she know? Because the answer mattered. She knew my name. She had sent letters to my address. She had filed complaints listing me as owner. She had offered me an annexation agreement. She knew exactly who I was. And she had still called. The deputy stepped away and spoke quietly into his radio. A few minutes later, he returned. Mr. Whitmore, we're documenting this incident. I nodded. Thank you. Rebecca looked frustrated. This is ridiculous. The deputy remained calm. Ma'am, if someone provides inaccurate information to law enforcement, that becomes a serious matter. She looked at me. For the first time, she was not looking at a ranch owner. She was looking at someone who had preserved every step leading to this moment. Before leaving, the deputy asked me one final question. Mr. Whitmore, has this happened before? I looked at the ranch, the letters, the complaints, the false survey, the access demands. Yes, the deputy nodded. Then I suggest you provide all documentation. I will. After the vehicles left, Rebecca stayed near the gate. She did not say anything. Neither did I. Because at that point, words no longer mattered. She had spent months building a case. She just never realized whose case she was building. The next morning, Rachel called. I heard. Already? Daniel, this is a small county. She paused. Tell me exactly what happened. I told her everything. The call, the deputies, the questions, the documents. When I finished, there was silence. Then Rachel said, "That was the moment we needed." "Why?" "Because now we can prove intent." I looked out towards the lake. Meaning? Meaning she did not misunderstand your ownership. Rachel's voice became firm. She knew. And that changed everything. Because a person who makes a mistake can be corrected. A person who knowingly creates a false story has a much bigger problem. Rebecca Caldwell had spent months trying to convince everyone that my land belonged to her community. Now she had created the one piece of evidence she could not explain away, a recorded, false accusation. And this time, the story was no longer hers to control. For years, I had watched people use confidence as a substitute for truth. They spoke with certainty. They acted like authority belonged to whoever sounded the most convinced. Rebecca Caldwell was no different. She believed being HOA president gave her influence. She believed controlling meetings gave her power. She believed that if enough people repeated her version of events, reality would eventually follow. But the problem with evidence is that it does not care how confident someone sounds. It only cares what happened. The morning after the sheriff's visit, Rachel Morgan arrived at Silver Creek Ranch carrying a notebook and a copy of the incident report. She placed it on my desk. "This changes the case." I looked at the report. "What exactly changed?" "Intent." She pointed to the section describing Rebecca's statements to law enforcement. She did not report a property dispute. She reported a person who did not belong here. I nodded. She knew I belonged here. Exactly. Rachel opened another folder. Inside were copies of every letter Rebecca had sent me. The violation notices, the annexation proposal, the access agreement, all addressed to Daniel Whitmore at Silver Creek Ranch. "She cannot claim she didn't know who you were," Rachel said. "She communicated with you directly." She placed the documents beside the 911 report. That is the difference between confusion and deception. For months, Rebecca had tried to create uncertainty around ownership. But now the timeline showed something else. She knew the truth. She simply chose a different story when that story benefited her. Rachel spent the next week preparing. Not with emotion, not with public accusations, with documents. That was always her approach. The strongest legal arguments are rarely the loudest ones. They are the ones that leave the other side with nowhere to go. The first filing was a request for emergency preservation of records. It required Rebecca, Pine Ridge Estates, and any connected parties to preserve communications, financial records, development plans, and property documents related to Silver Creek Ranch. No deleted emails, no missing meeting notes, no unexplained changes. Everything had to remain available. The second action involved the false claims about ownership. Rachel included the original deed, the county records, the historical surveys, Michael Turner's boundary analysis, the unauthorized survey attempt, the lake development plans, and now the sheriff's documentation, a complete timeline, a story told through evidence. While Rachel worked on the legal filings, Sheriff Thomas Hayes reviewed the pattern of complaints connected to Pine Ridge Estates. He called me one evening. "Daniel, I want to ask you something." "What?" "How long has this been happening?" I looked at the folders stacked on my desk. "Months." "Why didn't you call us earlier?" "Because I was trying to solve it without escalating." There was a pause. "That sounds like you." I smiled slightly. Thomas knew me from my years working land protection cases. He understood that I was not looking for conflict. I was looking for resolution. "But Daniel," he continued, "there is something you need to understand." "What?" "When someone repeatedly uses public resources to create pressure against someone, that becomes a pattern." A pattern. That word mattered. Because one complaint can be dismissed. 2 complaints can be coincidence. But months of complaints, false claims, and inaccurate statements tell a different story. Meanwhile, Rebecca was still trying to control the narrative. She held another Pine Ridge Estates meeting. This time, the tone was different. According to Linda Parker, homeowners were asking questions. Real questions. Not the questions Rebecca prepared answers for. Where was the lake access agreement? Who owned the shoreline? Why were investors asking for proof? Why had the HOA spent money on planning something they did not control? Rebecca tried to redirect. She talked about community vision, future opportunities, neighborhood unity. But those words were becoming less effective, because homeowners had started looking at documents instead of listening to speeches. Linda called me afterward. She's losing control. Why? Because people are comparing what she said with what exists. That was the turning point. For months, Rebecca's greatest advantage was that most people had never checked the records. They trusted the person standing in front of them. Now they were checking. And once people start checking, stories built on assumptions become fragile. Then Rachel found the document that connected everything. It came from an investor communication archive, an email exchange between Rebecca and the developer group interested in Pine Ridge expansion. The subject line was, "Final Lake Access Confirmation." Rachel read it silently. Then she turned the screen toward me. The email was from Rebecca. "We anticipate owner cooperation after continued community pressure." I read the sentence twice. Owner cooperation, not agreement, not negotiation, cooperation. She was already assuming the outcome. She believed enough pressure would eventually force me to give her what she wanted. Below that sentence was another message. "The remaining obstacle is Mr. Whitmore's refusal." I looked at Rachel. She called me an obstacle. Yes. That was the moment the entire strategy became clear. Rebecca never saw this as a disagreement between neighbors. She saw me as a delay, something blocking a plan that she had already sold to other people. Rachel printed the email. "This is important. Because it proves motive?" "Yes." She gathered the documents together. The fake access agreement shows the false claim. The development plans show the financial reason. The complaints show the pressure campaign. And the 911 call shows she was willing to involve law enforcement. She looked at me. Together, they tell the whole story. A few days later, Rachel filed the initial civil complaint. Not a threat, not a warning, a legal action. The complaint named Rebecca Caldwell individually, Pine Ridge Estates HOA, and connected parties involved in the development plans. The claims included false statements regarding property ownership, interference with property rights, unauthorized attempts to create land claims, misrepresentation of access rights, improper use of HOA authority. The filing did not make Rebecca look powerful. It made her look exposed. That was the difference. For the first time since this began, Rebecca was no longer setting the pace. She was responding, and people like Rebecca hated that more than anything. They could handle opposition. They could handle criticism, but they struggled when someone else controlled the facts. The day after the complaint became public, I drove down the ranch road toward Silver Creek Lake. The water was calm. The property looked exactly the same as it had before Rebecca arrived. The fences were still standing. The trees were still there. The lake was still mine. But the fight had changed. Rebecca had spent months trying to convince everyone that ownership was a matter of influence. Now she was learning the truth. Ownership was a matter of records, and records do not negotiate. They do not get intimidated. They simply prove what happened. The case was moving forward. The evidence was complete. And Rebecca Caldwell was about to discover the one thing she never expected. The people she convinced to follow her were now the same people asking her for answers. For months, Rebecca had stood in front of Pine Ridge Estates and presented herself as the person protecting the community. She was the president who had solutions, the leader who understood growth, the person who could turn a neighborhood into something more valuable. But now homeowners were looking at something she could not control. Documents. And documents had a way of changing everything. The emergency HOA meeting was scheduled for a Thursday evening. Linda Parker told me the room was full before the meeting even started. People who normally sat quietly in the back rows were now holding copies of financial statements. Residents who once repeated Rebecca's talking points were asking questions. Simple questions. The kind Rebecca had avoided for months. Where is the lake agreement? Who owns the shoreline? Why did the HOA collect fees for improvements on private land? Why were investors being told access was guaranteed? Those questions were dangerous because they did not require opinions. They required answers, and Rebecca did not have them. Rachel Morgan had prepared the legal response carefully. No dramatic speeches, no public attacks, just facts. The original deed to Silver Creek Ranch, the county survey records, the boundary analysis from Michael Turner, the unauthorized survey attempt, the proposed access agreement, the development plans, the investor communications, the financial records Linda provided. Every piece connected. Every action had a date. Every decision had a name attached to it. Rebecca had spent months creating a story. Rachel had spent weeks proving the truth. The first major discovery involved the lake access claims. Rebecca had repeatedly told homeowners that Silver Creek Lake was part of the future expansion plan. She used phrases like community recreation area and shared waterfront opportunity. But when Rachel compared those statements with official records, the truth was clear. There was no easement, no purchase agreement, no access right, no ownership interest. Nothing. The HOA had been collecting money for something it never had. Linda presented the financial records. The room went silent. Special assessments, planning expenses, consulting payments, thousands of dollars collected from homeowners based on the promise of a future amenity, an amenity that belonged to someone else. One homeowner stood up. "Rebecca, did you know Daniel owned that land when you collected these fees?" Nobody answered. Rebecca looked around the room. For the first time, she was not speaking to supporters. She was speaking to people who wanted the truth. "I believed the situation would be resolved." That answer created more questions, not fewer. Another homeowner asked, "Resolved how?" Rebecca looked uncomfortable, because the answer was obvious. She believed pressure would eventually force me to surrender. She believed enough complaints, enough meetings, enough public pressure would make ownership irrelevant. But ownership was not a popularity contest. A deed did not lose a vote. A property boundary did not change because a neighborhood wanted it to. The second discovery was worse. The financial records. Rachel had traced payments from the HOA's accounts. Some expenses were labeled as community planning. Some were labeled as development consulting. But several payments led back to companies connected to Rebecca. Linda confirmed the payments. "I approved them because Rebecca said they were necessary for future development." Rachel looked at the homeowners. That future development depended on land the HOA did not own. The room became completely quiet, because now the issue was no longer only about Daniel Whitmore. It was about every homeowner who trusted Rebecca with their money. The person who claimed she was protecting the community had placed the community at risk. Then came the investor communications. Rachel presented the emails showing Rebecca had represented Silver Creek Lake as a future amenity. One line received the most attention. "Owner cooperation is expected after continued community pressure." The homeowners read it carefully. Then they looked at Rebecca. That sentence revealed everything. She was not negotiating. She was planning pressure. She was not seeking permission. She was expecting surrender. A man who had lived in Pine Ridge for 6 years stood up. "You made us believe he was the problem." Nobody answered, because everyone in that room now knew the truth. Daniel Whitmore had never blocked their future. Their future had been built on a false assumption. The final evidence was the 911 call. Rachel did not play it for drama. She played it because it mattered. The homeowners heard Rebecca describe me as someone who did not belong on my own property. They heard her claim uncertainty about ownership. Then they saw the letters. The same letters where she addressed me as the property owner. The contradiction was impossible to ignore. She knew. That was the point that destroyed her defense, not that she was wrong, that she knew she was wrong. The next morning, Pine Ridge Estates received another shock. The investors withdrew from the expansion project. Without verified lake access, the development plans were no longer considered reliable. The luxury cabins, the private marina concept, the expanded recreation area, everything built around Rebecca's promises started disappearing because investors did not care about confidence. They cared about ownership. Meanwhile, Rachel filed additional motions requesting full financial review of the HOA's records. The court approved the review. Now every transaction connected to the project would be examined. Every payment, every contract, every decision. Rebecca's greatest weapon had always been control of information. Now information was everywhere, and she could not put it back. A week later, I received a message from Linda. She resigned. Rebecca? Yes. From the HOA. Linda paused. Not yet officially. I understood what that meant. Rebecca was still trying to protect whatever control she had left. But the foundation was gone. The homeowners no longer saw a leader. They saw someone who had created a problem and hidden it. The final HOA vote came 2 weeks later. The motion was simple. Remove Rebecca Caldwell as president. The result was unanimous, not one vote in her favor. The same homeowners who once trusted her now wanted distance from everything connected to her decisions. Rebecca had spent months trying to take control of my land. In the end, she lost control of the organization she claimed to represent. But there was still one thing left. The court. The evidence was complete. The records were clear, and Judge Robert Mitchell was about to decide the final question. Not whether Rebecca had made mistakes, but whether she had knowingly built an entire plan on something she never owned. That was the question Judge Robert Mitchell had to answer. By the time the case reached the courtroom, the argument had changed completely. At the beginning, Rebecca Caldwell wanted everyone to believe it was a simple disagreement between a homeowner and a neighboring community. A misunderstanding, a dispute over cooperation, a difference of opinion. But the evidence told a different story. This was never about cooperation. It was about control. The courtroom was quiet when Rachel Morgan presented the final evidence. She did not begin with accusations. She began with records, the deed to Silver Creek Ranch, the county filings, the original surveys, the documents that proved the ownership history of the land. Then she moved forward through time. The first HOA letters, the annexation proposal, the fake community access agreement, the altered boundary documents, the unauthorized survey attempt, the investor presentations, the financial records. Each document added another piece to the same picture. Rebecca had not discovered a legal right to Silver Creek Lake. She had attempted to create one. The judge listened carefully. He asked questions throughout the hearing. Not emotional questions, legal questions. Was there ever a recorded easement granting Pine Ridge Estates access to this property? No, Your Honor, Rachel answered. Was there ever a transfer of ownership? No. Was the HOA ever included in the original property documents? No. The answers were simple, because the truth usually is. The complicated part was explaining how someone could spend months acting as if those answers did not matter. Rebecca's attorney argued that the HOA had acted in good faith, that there had been confusion, that everyone believed an agreement could be reached. But the documents created a problem. Good faith does not include hiding facts. Good faith does not include presenting private property as a future community asset. Good faith does not include telling law enforcement that an owner does not belong on his own land. Then came the issue of intent. The 911 call, the letters, the emails. Rachel placed them side by side. One showed Rebecca knew Daniel Whitmore owned Silver Creek Ranch. The other showed Rebecca told authorities the property was vacant and the occupant was unauthorized. The contradiction was impossible to explain. Judge Mitchell looked over the documents for several moments. Then he asked a question that changed the room. "Ms. Caldwell, did you believe Mr. Whitmore owned this property?" Everyone became silent. Rebecca sat at the table beside her attorney. For the first time since this began, there was no audience to convince. No HOA meeting, no homeowners watching, no investors waiting for reassurance. Only a judge and the truth. Her attorney answered first. "My client believed there were unresolved property interests." The judge looked back at the documents. "That was not my question." The silence lasted several seconds. Finally, Rebecca answered. "Yes." One word, but it changed everything, because now the court had what Rachel had been building toward. Knowledge. Rebecca knew. She knew Daniel owned the ranch. She knew the lake was private. She knew there was no recorded access right. She knew the documents did not give her authority, and she acted anyway. Judge Mitchell issued his ruling 2 weeks later. The decision was clear. Silver Creek Ranch belonged exclusively to Daniel Whitmore. Pine Ridge Estates had no ownership interest in the lake, no access rights, no authority over the property. The HOA's claims regarding community use were dismissed. The court also ordered the removal of all references suggesting Silver Creek Lake was a Pine Ridge amenity. The development plans built around the lake were officially dead. The cabins, the marina, the expanded recreation area. All of it disappeared because it had been built on a promise Rebecca never had the power to make. But the consequences did not stop there. The HOA Financial Review uncovered additional unauthorized spending connected to the failed expansion effort. Funds collected from homeowners had been used based on a project that depended on land Rebecca never controlled. The homeowners who once trusted her were now the people demanding accountability. Rebecca Caldwell was removed permanently from leadership positions within Pine Ridge Estates. Her reputation in the community collapsed. The person who built her influence by convincing people she had all the answers was finally exposed by the one thing she could not manipulate: the facts. Months later, I stood at the edge of Silver Creek Lake again. Nothing about the land had changed. The same shoreline, the same trees, the same quiet water reflecting the mountains. But I noticed something different. The pressure was gone. For a long time, every walk around the lake reminded me of the fight. Every fence post represented another argument. Every document represented another challenge. Now they represented something else. Proof. Proof that ownership mattered. Proof that patience mattered. Proof that you do not protect what belongs to you by becoming like the people trying to take it. You protect it by knowing the truth, preserving the evidence, and letting the law do what it was designed to do. A few weeks after the ruling, Deputy Ethan Collins stopped by the ranch during his patrol. He parked near the old wooden gate and walked up the driveway, the same driveway where he had once arrived, believing he was responding to an emergency. Now he came as a friend. "You doing all right, Mr. Whitmore?" I looked toward the lake. "Better than all right," he smiled. "Good." We stood there quietly for a moment. Then he said something I never forgot. "You know, most people would have lost their temper." I looked back at the ranch. "I almost did. But you didn't." "No." I shook my head. "Because anger would not have protected the land." That was the lesson Rebecca Caldwell never understood. She thought power came from a title, from a position, from getting people to follow her. But real power is different. Real power comes from knowing what is true, from having the patience to prove it, from understanding that a person can create a story, but they cannot rewrite reality forever. Rebecca wanted Silver Creek Lake because she saw value, she saw investment, she saw opportunity. But she never understood why it mattered. The lake was never valuable because of what could be built around it. It was valuable because it was already complete. The ranch remained. The lake remained. The land stayed exactly where it had always been. And the person who tried to take control of something she never owned lost the one thing she wanted most, the ability to control the story. Because in the end, the truth did not need a campaign. It only needed a record.
Because in the end, the truth does not need a campaign, it only needed a record. The lessons from Daniel with more story is that when someone challenges what you own, your strong frustration is not anger or a louder voice. It's in knowing your facts, keeping your documents, and staying patient enough to let the truth speak for itself. Daniel did not protect Silver Creek Ranch by reacting more conflict. He protected it by reserving evidence, respecting the law, and standing firmly on what was really true. Stories like this remind us that dignity is often shown in quiet moments. Sometimes the hard thing to do is remain calm when you feel pressure, misunderstood, and pushed aside. But patience, reparations, and honesty can carry a person through situations that seem overwhelming. If you, however, deal with an HOA issues, a property dispute, or a situation where you have to stand your ground, share your experience in the comments. Type yes if you believe keeping records and knowing your right can make a difference. And if you enjoy stories about land, justice, resilience, and ordinary people protecting what's matter to them, consider subscribing. Stay with us for more HOA and ranch story where patience, truth, and perseverance shape the outcome.